Why is the US talking about testing nuclear weapons? What does the country gain by testing them repeatedly? Is it information? Is it checking that they are working just fine or something else? My thoughts on Trump's announcement to restart nuclear tests. Is it in response to the Burevestnik missile test by Russia, an escalation of war in Ukraine, along with the continuous rise of China? Or do they truly want to start a nuclear age like they did in the Cold War by dropping nukes on Japan? Well, the dropping nukes on Japan happened before the Cold War. But anyway, so why is the US talking about testing nuclear weapons? Why has Trump announced that the US is gonna resume testing nuclear weapons? Why is that? Look, nuclear weapons have to be tested. Any weapons that you have to be tested to validate the design, to validate it's working fine, to find flaws and defects in those weapons, and then you rectify that and test again to see if the flaw has now been fixed. Maybe you want a certain amount of yield in terms of kilotons of TNT or megatons of TNT, but maybe it's not exactly the yield is not what you expect. Maybe it's too little, maybe it's too much. So you want to fine tune the weapon. For these things, you have to test it, right? So when did the last nuclear weapons tests happen? 1998, India. After that, North Korea has been testing nuclear weapons. France tested sometime in the 1990s, and the US tested some time ago. The Russians tested before that. So it's been like 30 or so years since the West has tested nuclear weapons. And maybe they have come up with more advanced designs that they can kind of do some modeling through supercomputers and whatnot. But you actually, at the end of the day, you have to actually test it out. So maybe the US has decided that it's time to test out the new designs and test that the old ones are still working as we expect. Makes sense. But you can't just start testing just like that unilaterally. So you have to invent a just cause for whatever action you're going to take. If the action is very potentially destabilizing, you need to justify it. So that's why they are blaming other countries. Maybe China, Russia, Pakistan are actually testing it. It's very possible. If the US president says that, we have to take it seriously. So what does the country gain by testing nuclear weapons? Not repeatedly. It's been 30 or so years. It's been a long gap. It makes sense to test them now. It's been too long since you tested. Whatever weapons you have to keep on testing them periodically. India conducts missile tests periodically, doesn't it? Even the old missiles, like the Prithvi missiles and the older Agni missiles, we test them once or twice a year just to ensure. You take a random missile out of the stockpile and you test it so that statistically everything is working fine. So the US, obviously, it makes sense for them to test nuclear weapons. It's been a long time since any of these were tested. So it looks like Trump has decided that now is the time, or maybe he has been given the advice that now is the time to resume nuclear testing. So it's not like they are trying to escalate some. Is it in response to the Burevestnik missile test? No, it's not that. The Burevestnik is a missile. It's not a nuclear weapon. It is a missile that is nuclear capable. It can carry a nuclear warhead, and it's a nuclear propelled missile. Okay, it most likely has a nuclear powered ramjet engine. So the propulsion itself is nuclear, which gives it theoretically unlimited range. It can fly for months. It can even be recalled without actually hitting a target. That's the deal with the Burevestnik missile. So that obviously is something that the US currently doesn't have. They had something called Project Pluto or something in the 1960s, but they shelved it. Maybe it was seen as too provocative. Maybe it was seen as not necessary once the ballistic missiles of the US became sufficiently accurate. So the US isn't trying to start a nuclear age. We are already in the nuclear age. So many nations, like 8-9 nations, have nuclear weapons. So the US just wants to test maybe its newer designs, maybe test the validity of the older designs, and they are okay if other countries follow suit. Because if the US tests, I assure you, Russia will test. China also will most likely test. And there's a moderate probability that India will also test. Makes sense for India to test. So that's the deal. And I would say that if the US tests, India should also go ahead and test whatever needs to be tested. Because see, we tested in 1998. I'm sure we have enhanced those designs. That's 27 years ago that we tested. By those nuclear weapons that we tested at that time, I'm sure we have far more advanced nuclear weapons designs today, but those have not been tested, right? So if the US tests, it makes a lot of sense for us to validate our own nuclear weapons designs, the new ones. And how do you do that? You do it by testing those.